You know, it's really interesting. I had, for a while, I was doing my research, I would say 60% of it from executive intelligence review. And I was always afraid uh, of citing the publication because I knew that people had certain preconceived notions about LaRouche and the movement. And I felt like, well, I'll wait until I'm proven right, and then people will ask me, "Where did you get this information?" And when things started to shift, when more was uncovered, and then I was going to sort of, I wouldn't say like come out as a supporter of the LaRouche movement, which I'm not, but that is more for strategic reasons than anything else. But more and more people are expressing interest in this as a source, and so I'm encouraged. And so I'm going to continue to make my way as if on stepping stones toward an understanding of why we are why we are where we are. And, just recently, people were asking about the Club of Rome. So I did a reading of sort of a foundational, maybe like a little mini dossier on Club of Rome recently. And I, of course, I'm continuing to do research into the Black nobility. And that, of course, is problematic because there are very few sources. The most in-depth ones are anonymous, and while my research and my instincts tell me that it is that this source is, in my view, serious and probably reliable, I'm a little bit leery about doing readings or citing it. But the other thing that fascinates me is this time period, as I've said, almost every video, from the late 70s through the early 80s, so much happening in Europe, so many dynamism that exposes, I think, this sort of like the last gasp or struggle for the soul of humanity, which I wouldn't say we've lost, but it looks as though the bad guys have been able to move their agenda forward. And I just feel that it's, again, instructive to go back to this period and uncover the clues that are left behind, particularly by these wonderful researchers at EIR. This is from July 11th, 1978. Executive Intelligence Review, and it seems to be right on point in terms of what I've been going after. So why don't we just jump in? And this is the opposition. Nobility calls for zero growth. And today we would understand that as you will own nothing, you will eat the bugs, and you will like it. And maybe a couple of you know, a bit disappointed when I was in Austria recently to find that with regard to the Habsburgs, that's a personal matter. I don't want to go into that right now. Suffice it to say, I feel a little more comfortable letting the cat out of the bag. I still believe Otto von Habsburg made some excellent points that I'm considering in terms of what you would call sort of unbridled mass capitalism and the dangers it poses. But I've gotten into that elsewhere, and I'll do that again later. So here we have His Imperial Highness Otto von Habsburg presided over a remarkable meeting of his fellow European aristocrats in Paris on June 29th. The ostensible purpose of the session was to work out a, quote, new right strategy for next year's European Parliament elections. But, judging from the unprecedented press coverage the aristocrats received and their urgent tone, their actual goal was much more short range: to halt the, quote, grand design strategy of West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt and French President Giscard d'Estaing before it is pushed through the European Economic Community Summit in Bremen and the July 16th OECD Summit in Bonn. So that you can see, looking back, they managed to completely dismantle the Helmut Schmidt government. What must be prevented, the Assembly declared, is the creation of a, quote, Europe of the fatherlands, unquote, a term coined by General de Gaulle to denote a system of independent humanist republics. And this, to me, seems more in line with the legacy of the actual Holy Roman Empire. In its place, these aristocrats wish to establish, quote, a Europe of the regions, a collection of feudalized fiefdoms divided according to Basque, Breton, Corsican, Walloon, Flemish, Languedoc, Alsatian, and Bavarian, quote, nationalities. Such a system would, of course, prohibit the development of nuclear energy, and the aristocrats made it clear that they are counting on environmentalists and terrorists to get the job done. Otto von Habsburg, who led the meeting, was recently granted West German citizenship by the state of Bavaria over the objections of federal government leaders. His new citizenship papers were handed over to him by Bavarian Interior Minister Seidel, well known for his legal defense of Nazi Rudolf Hess at the Nuremberg trials. Other participants at the Paris gathering included Henry VI of Bourbon, who has excellent connections to the Spanish terrorist Guerrilleros del Cristo Rey, and representatives from the Italian fascist MSI and Spanish fascist Fuerza Nueva. Opening Mass was said by Archbishop Lefebvre of Geneva, who has become the darling of these circles through his refusal to follow the Vatican's progressive church reforms. And of course, we've peeked in elsewhere on this bishop and his far more serious a level of the sinister nature of his activities. We'll get back into that. He's involved in the attempted assassinations on Pope John Paul. Unfortunately, Prince von Schwarzenberg was unable to attend. While under investigation last month for suspected involvement in the murder of former Italian minister Aldo Moro, this is very fresh now, this is 1978, he died in a mysterious automobile accident, so he was probably going to reveal something. August Count, August Count Kageneck, writing in the Hamburg daily Die Welt, gave the meeting rave review, especially raised up the plight of South Tyrolean People's Party, which is accusing the Italian government of ruining the, quote, ecological system of the Alps region. So we're probably looking at an attempt to derail development. In order to demonstrate that they are dead serious about their Europe of the regions strategy, a wave of bombings hit France only days after the meeting's conclusion. Many were small bombs set off locally by Corsican and Breton terrorist groups, but One quite large explosive destroyed a gallery of the palace at Versailles. My God. My God. So far, 2 Breton terrorists have been arrested. Count Kalganek explained that the attack on Versailles was a protest against fanatical Jacobins such as President Giscard d'Estaing and the Gaullists. Wow. Stopping Schmidt. Other aristocrats have been concentrating on halting Chancellor Schmidt's domestic nuclear policies. A meeting occurred last week between Otto Count Lambsdorff, Schmidt's out-of-favor economics minister, Andreas Count von Bernstorff, a large landowner in Lower Saxony, and Christopher Freiherr von dem Busche, probably related to the Bush family. Undoubtedly, I have no doubt about that. A lay head of the German Evangelical Church, EKD. The 3 noblemen agreed that neither Bernstorff nor the EKD itself would sell any land to the state government to construct the much-needed nuclear waste dump near the town of Gorleben, causing great rejoicing among the greenies known to operate out of the cellar of Count von Bernstorff's castle. The Hamburg weekly Die Zeit, whose editor is Countess Marion von Dürnhoff, published a letter from Rainer von dem Busche pleading for the inclusion in state and federal parliament of the environmentalist citizens' initiative groups in order to fight against the autocracy and uncontrollability of the government. Friedrich Freiherr von Westphalen, chairman of the Association of German Forest Owners, wrote in the newspaper Rheinischer Merkur that West German conservatives must become more environmentally minded and must follow the example of Erhard Eppler, a social democratic associate of Willy Brandt, in conducting a reevaluation of values, quote unquote, such as industrial growth and nuclear energy. Otto von Habsburg himself has praised Willy Brandt for his opposition to Schmidt's nuclear policies. Brandt recently stated that the anti-nuclear groups can do a lot of good, but it would be even better if the Social Democratic Party as a whole adopted their policies. The Vatican and the grand design. This gets quite interesting here. The fact that last week's meeting in Paris was kicked off with a mass from Archbishop Lefebvre is a significant indicator of the aristocrats' attitude toward the ascendant humanist faction within the Vatican, at present a crucial international mover of the grand design. At the Paris meeting, Lefebvre accused the Vatican of having been infiltrated by Freemasons. Wow, the gall of these people. And being under the influence of the devil. Otto von Habsburg agreed, stating that the Vatican cannot represent, quote, cannot represent Christianity because it is implicated in the Ostpolitik, i.e. Italian development deals with the Soviet Union in coordination with the Schmidt-Brezhnev economic treaty signed in May. Responding to these and other attacks, Pope Paul VI sternly warned Lefebvre that, quote, the moment of truth has come. He must either recant or else he will be excommunicated. Of course, the response to that, a couple of years later, we have a most extreme response, attempts on the life of the Pope. The West German left liberal daily Frankfurter Rundschau, however, has strongly advised the Pope instead to negotiate with such dissident elements. It is hardly coincidental, therefore, that Willy Brandt is including the Vatican in his tour of European capitals to begin this week. Brandt will be trying to pry European leaders away from the grand design in favor of the, quote, common fund and commodity stabilization hoaxes put forward by the World Bank's Brandt Commission. Before departing, Brandt pleaded that he would stop criticizing Eastern European countries for their inadequate development aid to the Third World, if only they would join his commission. So we have to remember here that his idea of development aid is not that at all. It's more about establishing control over the Third World and retarding its development. The feudal aristocrats have indeed become so desperate that they have dragged out some of the big anti-humanist philosophical artillery. Sir Karl Popper, the Vienna-born, London-based chief spokesman of the Aristotelian school of logical positivists founded by Ludwig Wittgenstein, attacking the very heart of the Schmidt-Giscard-Brezhnev strategy of city building based on Neoplatonic politics of reason. Popper wrote this week in Die Welt that the Greek philosopher Plato, quote, had a conception of human life which I find repulsive and downright horrifying. His weakness was that he believed in the existence of a philosophical elite, unquote. Spinoza, who, quote, taught how to tame the passions through reason, practiced an untenable and dangerous form of rationalism, according to the ideological fascist Popper, who much prefers the Aristotelian worldview of the British Royal Society's fraud, Isaac Newton. All right. And then I wanted to back up here. I'm particularly, so this little section here, Vatican takes aim at the British monarchy. And this is when there was a greater division in the world, where there was opposition within the Vatican to the kind of anti-humanist, depopulationist, Malthusian agenda headed up by, I would say, Charles III at this point. So going back to 1978, you have a clear, strong opposition within the Vatican, which doesn't exist today. So in a sense, we have to acknowledge that we've lost at least one battle, the battle for the Vatican. In a bold attempt to quarantine the British oligarchical forces who are set to demand full allegiance to their aims at the Bonn summit, the Vatican has taken aim at the heart of the beast, the British monarchy itself. Representing a key strand of the international humanist alignment, the Vatican has issued a pointed attack on the outlaw nature of British policy. That nails it, which has historically attempted to subvert motion toward worldwide progress and development. You see why I just love going back to this time period, because what we're seeing today, it's so bloody covered up. You can just see it laid bare. You can see the outlines of all of it. These roiling conflicts going on. The Most Reverend Thomas Winning, Catholic Archbishop of Glasgow, Scotland, and the Vatican's representative in Britain, has issued almost daily polemics against Prince Charles, the heir apparent to the British throne, since Prince Charles's public denunciation of the Pope last weekend. The ostensible issue which provoked Charles's peevish attack was the Pope's refusal to bless the marriage of Anglican Prince Michael, the Queen's cousin, to Baroness Marie Christine von Reibnitz, a Catholic divorcee, a member of the Austrian aristocracy. The Pope's refusal to allow this oligarchical alliance to take place in a Catholic church prompted an immediate outburst from the British heir, who told the Salvation Army gathering that for the Pope to meddle in such epistemological matters was, quote, worse than folly, and that Christianity should not bog itself down with academical or theological concerns. Immediately retaliating, Archbishop Winning declared himself outraged at Charles's slanders and challenged the prince to put his own house in order, quote unquote. In a BBC interview on Sunday, July 2nd, the Archbishop sharpened his attack on the monarchy, calling for a repeal of the laws of succession, which bars Catholics from holding the throne of England. In an age of equality, justice, and human rights, said Winning, quote, I feel the law of succession is rather anachronistic. He was referring to a 1701 law that ensured that the British crown could only pass to descendants of the Protestant houses of Orange and Hanover. The House of Hanover is still very powerful. The archbishops, one of those families, and the House of Orange as well, that has so much power, I don't think people can quite grasp the nature, the character of it, or the fact that probably the House of Hanover is more powerful than the House of Windsor. The archbishop's barbs were explicitly directed at the Anglo-Dutch oligarchical networks, which to this day still wield extensive political control in Europe, in opposition to the forces representing a higher morality of reason and humanism. Okay, it's laid bare right there in that statement. Let me read that again, just for emphasis. The archbishop's barbs were explicitly directed at the Anglo-Dutch oligarchical networks, which to this day still wield extensive political control in Europe, in opposition to the forces representing a higher morality of reason and humanism. It is on precisely this account that the Archbishop raised the question of Prince Charles's woolly brand of Christianity, which makes no distinction between good and evil, right and wrong, except as it suits the British crown. So I think none of that surprises us. We may express some surprise that it has been made so much clearer to those of us who are paying attention, and the way that tendency toward what some people would call a form of Satanism, that it's been amplified and now drowns out almost anything else. Then I saw something. Yeah, maybe I hadn't intended to dig into this, but let's go ahead. This is just attracting my attention here. 6, monetarists stop grand design at all costs. Grand design isn't rational. Following are excerpts from an article appearing in the newspaper of the Zürich Nomes Neue Zürcher Zeitung, 4th of July, interesting, entitled, Is Bonn on a Separate Path? Brezhnev is crusading against American foreign policy. We are now registering, however, an interesting variant. Bonn is being excluded from Brezhnev's blanket criticism of the West, and German-Soviet relations are given the highest marks and praised and raised up as an important element of stability. Once again, this brings up the questions which have been floating around ever since Brezhnev's visit to Bonn and its enthusiastic endorsement by Moscow. These questions concerning possible turn in German-Soviet relations, So I suppose we're looking at today, absolutely don't want that to happen. That's pretty much out of the question. Although the German people would seem today to be more amenable to this, and perhaps some of them are old enough to remember. Of those who are active now in any kind of resistance, perhaps they remember this. Prying the West German state away from its Western alliances indeed clearly remains the aim of Soviet policy, and in Bonn there are apparently some prominent leaders with dreams of a future socialist Germany who agree with these intentions. Silent, perhaps even verbal agreement exists between Brezhnev and Schmidt in their criticisms of those statements from American politicians, which are denounced as a disruption of détente. A policy in Bonn which would allow itself to be led against America out of mistrust would also have to be constantly aware that its complement, namely mistrust of Germany, which exists not only in Washington and is not merely latent, exists as well. Some people may put some trust in Giscard, who has gone a good way in seconding Schmidt's criticism of American policy, but such a defensive Franco-German common front would rapidly come to an end once the German-Soviet relations intensified. Probably true. And furthermore, is it conceivable that Germany would completely alter its security arrangements, which are essentially based on American nuclear power and its obligations on the basis of a piece of paper, a non-aggression treaty, for example, i.e., on the wolf's mere promise that he won't eat the lamb? This is, in fact, the highly reckless perspective for a Finlandization. All the speculation one hears nowadays about political alternatives is not proceeding rationally, but neither these grand designs nor their propagandists are rational, especially in Germany. Here, portions of Roland Evans and Robert Novak's columns, Brezhnev courting Bonn. The Soviet campaign to cast doubt on the dependability of the U.S. is in full bloom across Europe, particularly here in West Germany, which for 30 years has been the root of U.S.-European strategy against Moscow. The swell of this Soviet campaign is everywhere, sweetened with the apprehensions of America's NATO allies as to whether the Carter administration really knows what it wants and how to get it. Such Moscow-inspired atmospherics have clearly had an effect on Chancellor Schmidt, who is burdened with a virulent left wing. Without clear U.S. leadership for West Germany and other European states, Schmidt will hardly say anything nasty about Soviet adventures in Africa and Afghanistan, South Yemen, or elsewhere. The British press response? After weeks of insisting that British Prime Minister Callaghan's 5-point program for inflationary expansion and energy consumption cuts would be the major point of discussion at the Bonn summit, the British press has bowed to reality, admitting that France and West Germany have prepared a completely different approach. Financial Times, Herr Schmidt means it. July 6th. Who would have thought, even a year ago, that Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, that apostle of economic convergence and derider of monetary conjuring tricks, would be leading the drive for a wider zone of currency stability in Europe? Almost as striking, they say, as his style of personal diplomacy to get his views across. The future? A combined German-French control of the EEC Council of Ministers to push this policy through in Europe. Here, the striking thing is not the German perusal of these objectives, currency stabilization, enlargement of EEC membership to include Greece, Portugal, and Spain, and export earnings stabilization for the less developed countries, which is already well known. It is again the degree of close collaboration with the French, whose 6-month term as Council President succeeds Germany's, The desire on both sides is to secure as smooth a transition as possible so that the French can pick up more or less where the Germans left off and continue to head in the same direction. Well, that last part wasn't as interesting as I thought, so maybe I wasn't misguided in wanting to forego reading it. Maybe there's some details in there that were at least passably interesting. But anyway, appreciate everyone's input and encouragement and insights, and wish you all very well.